we use a term many times, the word legacy. And when we think about a legacy, there's a lot of ways that can be looked at. But when we define the word legacy, it is defined as a gift by will, a will that parents might leave for their children, especially of money or other personal property, bequest. In other words, someone might say, she left us a legacy of $1 million. Probably not a lot of people are able to say that, but that would be one way to use the word legacy. Another way is it's something transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past. The definition of legacy is something that is passed on then, essentially. Something that is left behind or passed on to another generation. But a legacy actually can take on a lot of forms. A legacy might be one's faith or one's ethics, one's core values. It might be monetary. It might be assets, and we tend to think of that many times. But it might come more from one's character, from the reputation, their life, the life that you lead, setting an example for others and to guide their future. I want you to open your Bible to 2 Timothy this morning and notice in chapter 1, a passage that you've read many times, and I want to make some observations about it this morning. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, I want to read with you there in verse 5. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and in verse 5. I actually want to begin up in verse 4. Paul said that he was greatly desiring to see you, speaking to Timothy, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt or lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. You know, as we look at this passage, we see the legacy of Lois and Eunice in the spiritual heritage that Timothy had. When Paul wrote his final letter to Timothy, he was encouraging him here in 2 Timothy to persevere in his faith in Christ. And the first thing that he notes is Timothy's genuine faith. But he doesn't just talk about Timothy's genuine faith. He takes the time to bring out the fact that this was something that was handed down to him. Now, we can't have someone hand us what is genuine and it be genuine in us. We've got to be genuine in order to have genuine faith. But here's what's beautiful, that Timothy had the blessing. He had the legacy handed down first from his grandmother, then from his mother, then to him, of a genuine faith. And even though Paul would affectionately call Timothy my true son in the faith in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and in verse 2, he wasn't the one that taught him about Christ. Paul did not teach Timothy to know Christ. Now, Paul taught Timothy a lot. There's no doubt about that. Paul would even tell Timothy in chapter 2, the things that you've heard from me, commit to faithful men. But Timothy already knew the Lord. And the one that taught him to know Christ was his mother and his grandmother. Timothy was of mixed parentage. His father was a Gentile, his mother was a Jew, but his mother was obviously one who was a Christian. Because when Paul first met Timothy in Acts chapter 16, I want you to notice there in Acts 16 and verse 2, it says that Timothy was well spoken of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium. By the brethren. These are Christians, not just Jews, but these are Christians that he was well spoken of here. So when Paul first met him, he was already a leader, and the believers thought highly of him. And he eventually became Paul's intern. He was his traveling companion. He was his trusted protege. So much so that the apostle would send him to deal with some of the troublesome problems at Corinth. We see in chapter 4 of 1 Corinthians and in verse 17. And then from there would send him to confront the false teachers in Ephesus in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and in verse 3, where he was to charge them that they were to teach no other doctrine. And all of this testifies to this young man's spiritual maturity, his leadership, but we see the genesis. We see the source of it was not his father. It was his mother and his grandmother, two godly women who were Christians, who shared their genuine faith. He said it lived first in your mother and your grandmother, and they shared what they had with this son, this grandson, Timothy. I think that this is beautiful, and it helps us to understand the importance of leaving a spiritual legacy. It really won't matter how much we save up and leave to our kids monetarily if we don't leave to them genuine faith. And I'm not saying that I can make my kids have faith, or because I had a genuine faith, they're going to have it. But the best thing I can leave for them is that example and that training and that teaching, and exactly what Timothy had from his mother and his grandmother. There is no greater gift that we can leave to our children. I was working on this lesson and completely forgot one of the greatest quotes from my father-in-law, and Jennifer reminded me of it this morning as I told her the title of the lesson. We have Jennifer's dad used to write on a whiteboard every Sunday morning just a thought for people to take with them, just something to take home. And the last Sunday that he was healthy enough to do that, before he passed with pancreatic cancer, what he wrote on the whiteboard was that a life lived for the Lord leaves a lasting legacy. He liked those quotes start with the same letter, but it sticks with you, doesn't it? But it's just so powerfully true. A life lived for the Lord leaves a lasting legacy. It is that kind of legacy that I hope that we would all be mindful of, and especially to be thinking of how powerful that is today, being mindful and appreciative of mothers. Yes, Jermaine reminded us of this. And while we don't celebrate Mother's Day as a church, it's not a holy day, it's not something that the church does. The fact that it is always on a Sunday, on the first day of the week, when we are assembled together, we're always mindful of it on the Lord's Day. And it's no different than maybe your birthday falls on a Sunday and you're still going to celebrate your birthday. It doesn't make it a work of the church, but we can be thankful for that. And that's what we're doing this morning. We're thankful for mothers. But I want us to especially think about what mothers do when they leave this spiritual legacy like Timothy's mother and grandmother did. You know, I've thought often about the blessing that I was given to grow up in a home where both of my parents were Christians when I was born. And they were Christians to a large degree because their parents taught them to be Christians. My mother was a Christian, and her mother, my grandmother, was a Christian. My grandmother took my mother to church. She taught her the truth. And I don't remember, of course, both my parents were the youngest in their families, and I was third out of 4 children. So I was separated by quite a few years from both sets of my grandparents. So I don't remember a lot with a lot of my grandparents. I don't necessarily remember my grandmother teaching Bible classes or anything like that in a local church, but I'll tell you who she did teach. It was my mom. And think about the impact that had on my life. And that may have seemed like a small thing to her. She may have, I don't know, she may have had a low estimation of herself and what she's done in the kingdom, but she taught my mom. And my mom taught me and all the kids in my family, as my grandmother taught all the kids in her family. And this is something that has gone on to be handed down. And I look now at my children, and I know that this is at least a part of where this began. And I don't know if my grandmother's parent was a Christian. I don't know when she learned the gospel. I go back to my dad's side of the family. The spiritual leader in his family was his mother, my grandma. And a really interesting note about that is the way that my dad's parents, my grandma and grandpa, heard the truth and obeyed the gospel is that my dad's oldest sister, Anita, 13 years old, heard that a gospel meeting was being held at a one-room schoolhouse in the 1930s. She goes to the gospel meeting. She was interested in spiritual things, and she was so impacted by the preaching that she obeyed the gospel in that gospel meeting. She immediately went home and begged her parents to come and to hear the gospel. They went and heard the gospel that week, and they both obeyed the gospel. But it all began with a 13-year-old girl. And that changed everything in my dad's family. Within probably that year, if not the next year, my aunt had a leaky heart valve, which would be nothing today. But in the 1930s, there was no solution. And she passed. I'm pretty sure she was still 13 years old when she passed away. But think about the legacy. Think about what this little 13-year-old girl left. And all of the family, extended family, that have been touched by the gospel because she cared enough to go and hear it. I say all this because we don't appreciate enough I don't know why I'm emotional this morning, but we don't appreciate enough the little things. And this is something that we need to appreciate this morning. How beautiful that Timothy's mom and grandma helped nurture his faith so that he could be the man that God was calling him to be. 2 letters we have addressed to him. And he was so exceptional that Paul could say, I don't have anyone more like-minded that I can send to you than Timothy. We need to appreciate the impact that Eunice and Lois made, and let's always honor mothers who've made a decision to follow Jesus, because a life lived for the Lord truly leaves a lasting legacy. Which godly women can you honor today? A mother, a grandmother, an aunt, one who's like a mother to you or like a grandmother to you. We need to be thankful to God for all those who have had that kind of legacy in our life. And we need to think about the kind of legacy that they have left and what they have left for us. You know, there is a legacy that is left of true value with the woman who loves the Lord, who chooses to follow Jesus and to share that with others. And this true value is seen in the book of Proverbs in chapter 31 and verses 28 through 31. Proverbs 31 and verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Did you notice that? Charm is deceitful, beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. He's telling about true value. The true value that a woman has and that she hands down. And that is one who fears the Lord. This is a great value. This is a legacy to hand down, to teach children what is truly valuable, what is truly to be sought after, and not only to tell them, but to show them what is most important in your life. And we have so many godly women here in this congregation that do that daily. There is that true and lasting serving love that is given to children by means of godly mothers. It is the very foundation of motherhood. Young women are to be taught by the older women to love their children in Titus 2 in verses 4 through 5, and to be homemakers, keepers at home, to manage the domestic affairs of a house. And all of that, what that demands is a foundation of love, and therefore older women are to teach the younger women that, and you can't teach what you don't know. So clearly there are older women who have learned and developed this, who have shown this kind of love in their own life. There is an affection that is the affection of a mother. Paul wrote and used it as a metaphor in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. In 1 Thessalonians 2 and in verse 7, Paul said, "We were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children." We know what that means. We know that there is a tender, cherishing love that a mother has. And I don't care who you are in this building, you have experienced that from someone, whether it is a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, or someone like a mother to you. You need to be thankful for that. You need to let them know you're thankful for that, because that's a gift that money can't buy. There is sacrifice in that kind of love. Giving and putting children first, as mothers do. And it is many times the sacrifice of giving up opportunities to make a great deal of money in various fields and to choose instead to manage those domestic affairs. Paul said in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 14, "I desire that younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, and give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully." This is the calling that God gives. This is not to say that a woman can't do that and still make money in some other venture or some other way. I'm not saying that, but it is the priority. This is the priority that needs to be given to it, because mothers need to be there for their children. They nourish those children and nurture those children without a doubt. We see Moses' mother, Jochebed, that gave birth to him and hid him because she saw how valuable he was, and then found the opportunity to nurse him up until the age past weaning and to care for him. She was there for Moses. Hannah was there for her son Samuel, through up until an age that he would be able to be given over to the duty of the temple. And even then, she brought gifts and things that he needed throughout the years. These mothers understood the critical need to always be there for their children, and this is a legacy that mothers leave. There's also the legacy of instruction, and how powerful that is. There is such great wisdom in our mothers, in our grandmothers, in godly women who can share these things. As we see with Timothy, it all began with a grandmother and a mother. Ephesians 6 and verse 4 tells fathers to train up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, but that doesn't release a mother from their responsibility to teach. We were looking in Proverbs 31, and I want you to notice how that starts out. In Proverbs 31 and in verse 1, "The words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him." You know what you're reading there? You're reading the words of his mom. He is giving us by inspiration the wisdom that came not from his father, it came from his mother. Never discount that. And husbands and fathers, never discount the wisdom of your wife, the mother of your children. Lift it up and praise it. He goes on in verse 3, "Do not give your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings." That came from a mother. She's telling him to be careful about the women that he is around. Don't surrender the power and the opportunity you have for that desire that men have so strongly for women. This came from his mother. Mothers, you need to be teaching your sons in a way that only you can about those dangers that are out there. In the same way that a father needs to teach his daughter about the dangers that are out there with men, mothers need to teach, and this is a legacy that is left there. In Proverbs chapter 3 and in verse 1, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man." This is from parents. This is for him. In Proverbs 15 and in verse 20, "A wise son makes his father glad, but a foolish man despises or thinks little of his mother." This is all connected together. And then in Proverbs 31 and in verse 26, "She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness." Yes, we need to lift up, to appreciate, and to share this great gift that we have received, the wisdom and the instruction of our mothers. And there is the gift, there is the legacy of godliness. We start with genuine faith. I mean, this is what Paul saw in Timothy, that he praised as he wrote letters to other churches, that Timothy is exceptional. He is who he says he is. And you know, when you've been around some people that aren't genuine, it sure makes you appreciate genuine people, doesn't it? And the thing that Timothy had, he saw in his mother and he saw in his grandmother. Their faith was real. It was not just projected. They didn't fake it. They weren't playing church. They were in the image of Christ. And children can tell, can't they? Our children know us. They know what we're made of. They know whether or not we're faking it. They know whether or not it's real. And that impacts them more than anything else. I would say even more than whether or not we're a great teacher or gifted at oratory. More important than all the understanding that we can grasp and break down and share with them. The most important thing that they need to see in you is that it's real. That your walk with God is meaningful and that it is real. That your prayer life is real. That when you sing praise to God, you mean it. It's something that thrills your soul, that you enjoy doing. Your children can tell. And that's what Timothy had the gift of, is genuine faith. But also this godliness of discretion, of chastity. You know, in Titus chapter 2 and in verse 5, he says that these older women are to teach the younger women to be discreet and chaste. The idea of purity and to love that kind of purity, to be that kind of person. Proverbs 11 and verse 22 speaks about a woman who lacks discretion. This is one of the greatest gifts, mothers, that you can give to your children, is this kind of purity and fleeing youthful lust, as Paul talks about in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and in verse 22. Now, I know that sometimes we may go through a list like this and it may be easy to think, well, I just got started. Or I've had this past and I'm just now here and what can I do? Let me encourage you. It has to start somewhere. Do not be defeated. Don't be overwhelmed because you think, well, my children are almost grown, or I didn't do this at this particular time, or I just now became a Christian. You think about people like Rahab, a Canaanite harlot, who had a tremendous impact. Look at her lineage. Look at what she handed down. It's never too late. You think about Ruth, a Moabite, and look at her lineage as she followed there, marrying a descendant of Rahab. And the impact that she had and what she handed down. But she wasn't born with Christian parents. She wasn't born with Jewish parents, nor was Rahab. But they were blessed with godly husbands, Ruth with a godly mother-in-law. You know, it just has to start somewhere. Lydia, who was converted at some point in her adult life in the city of Philippi. I'm saying this because we don't need to be overwhelmed with the fact that maybe we're just now starting or we didn't give our kids what they needed at this particular time. You can now. You can now. Because no matter where you start, you can have a tremendous impact. I've known Christians that may have been raised to know the Lord and maybe they obeyed the gospel at a young age, but they just kind of hit a plateau and they stopped. But then later in their life, after their children were older, they understood what they needed to do and they began to grow. And as a result of that, their children saw that it's never too late. That in and of itself is a tremendous gift, a tremendous legacy that you can leave to your children. It's never too late. Wherever you are, start serving God today. The question is, what will your legacy be? What will you leave behind? You know, children are a heritage from the Lord, Psalm 127 and verse 3. But what will we leave them? Money? You know, there's a lot of things money can't buy. The most valuable thing that you can give your children is your time, and the most valuable time that you can give your children is to teach them to know the Lord. That's what David said as he spoke to Solomon, his son, in 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 9. As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father and serve him with a loyal heart, with a willing mind, for the Lord searches all hearts and understands all the intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he'll be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. That's what you need to leave your children. And again, I don't care when you start, but start. Children can learn as adults. They can learn a lot. Maybe you didn't learn until you were an adult, so start now. You say, too much time has passed. There's been too much water under the bridge. I've been too bad of an example. You know what would be a great example is to see a bad example become a good example. That's a wonderful lesson. And your children, here's what they will know. They'll know if it's real. That goes back to Timothy, his grandmother Lois, and his mother Eunice. He saw in them that it was real. I don't care at what time it became real for them. It's very obvious that they probably became Christians as adults. They were Jews and then learned the truth. This is early in the first century, somewhat so. At some point, we've got to leave what is most important with our children. You know, we're going to leave every earthly possession behind. We're going to leave it behind. Now, I'm not saying that that's what you need to leave to your children. What I'm saying is we need to understand from the standpoint of leaving something behind and not taking it with us, whatever you've got, whatever you just got, whatever you've waited forever to get, whatever you finally got when you turn 40 or 50 or 60 or whatever it might be, it'll be left behind if it is of a material nature. In 1 Timothy 6 and verse 6, now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it's certain we can carry nothing out. That's why James said in chapter 4 and verse 13, come now you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Whatever you have earned, whatever you have purchased, whatever you've been given of monetary or temporal nature, you will leave it behind. Jesus tells us then to count the cost of serving him. And there is nothing more valuable than surrendering ourselves to him. What kind of legacy will you leave? It won't be in how much money you made. I'll tell you something else that you're going to leave behind. And that is a book that contains the record of your life. You say, well, I'm not too good at scrapbooking. I'm not sure about that. Oh, no. It's already being filled out. And that book is going to be open in that judgment day. And you can't go back and rewrite it. There are a lot of people that like to rewrite history, aren't there? It's interesting how a lot of people in education are trying to rewrite history, and all of a sudden things are a lot different than what I learned in history when I was young. You can't do that with this book. God is keeping a record. In Revelation 20 and in verse 11, Revelation 20 and verse 11, then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were open, and another book was open, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. It's being kept. We're composing this book every day. You are composing this book this morning. It's being filled out. This book contains the choices that we make. It contains every deed. It contains every thought. And so we've got to learn from this that we need to seek God while it is time, and today is the day. Today is the day to start seeking the Lord with all your heart if you haven't already. you will leave that book, and your children and your children's children will be touched by that book. They won't have the book that God is keeping, but they will have the record. They will know. You will be spoken about by children and by your children's children. Let us realize how important that choice is. And your choice concerning Jesus is going to determine your fate after death. Jesus said in John 11:25, I am the resurrection and the life. In Romans 6 and verses 3 through 5, Paul said, do you not know that as many of us as were baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore we're buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we've been united together in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. That's where this all begins. If you haven't obeyed the gospel, this is where it starts. That you come believing in Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God, that you confess your faith in him, repent of your sins, and be buried in that watery grave of baptism with Christ so that you can rise up to walk in newness of life. And that's where the book gets really good. And that's the great legacy that you can leave to your children. Every one of us. We need to celebrate and be thankful for the gift, the legacy that's been left to us by those who've gone on before us, by those that we still have with us. But this morning, it's certainly appropriate that we be mindful of that kind of legacy with our mother, our grandmother, and that we help them and empower them to leave an even greater legacy as the years go on. My mother's doing that, impressing me every year with her faith. And I'm sure that you've experienced the same. And as I said, it may not be your mother. Maybe your mother has passed on. But I'm sure you can look back and appreciate things. And if your mother was not a Christian, you don't have that to look to. I'm certain that there are older women that you can go to and express that appreciation for that kind of legacy or that impact in your life. The most important thing that you can do this morning is that you can start leaving that yourself. And if you need to obey the gospel, that you do that before it's too late. And if as a child of God there's anything that you need to change in your life to be able to leave that legacy, that you start doing that right now. If you need our prayers, we'll pray with you and we'll pray for you. But whatever your need is, we plead with you to come while we stand and sing the invitation.